in honor of the late Associate Dean and Physical Education Professor Clifford Lewis. Dr. Clifford Lewis was formerly Associate Dean for Instruction in the College of Education at the University of Georgia in Athens, where she completed her undergraduate degree. She had an outstanding career in physical education, and her talents as a leader were recognized first by her selection as chairperson of physical education at Georgia, and later as Associate Dean in the College of Education. Through her generosity, we have been able to bring Dr. Daniel C. Funk, a world leader in sport consumer behavior and marketing, to the University of Georgia. Dr. Funk is a professor, senior research fellow, and director of research and PhD programs at Temple University. He researches the stage-based development of involvement to enhance sport management and health promotional strategies. He has been recognized as a research fellow for the Sport Marketing Association and the North American Society for Sport Management, which recognizes scholars who have shown excellence in the area of research and honors the work that they have disseminated through its official journal. Dr. Funk has participated in nearly 20 grant-funded projects and has written a refereed scholarly book, a sport marketing textbook, an industry book, and currently serves as editor for Sport Marketing Quarterly. He has published more than 80 articles in a variety of top journals, ranging from the role marathon events have on increasing physical activity and tourism for a host community, how the brand architecture of professional sports leagues influence franchise marketing strategies, how quickly individuals develop a social identity with new professional sport teams, to how a community-based running program can create self-sufficiency for homeless individuals. So as you can see, Dr. Funk has a wide range of research interests that touch many areas in kinesiology. Through his research, he has developed a segmentation framework that is currently being used by various sport and related organizations, including the Professional Sport League. This framework enables organizations to develop marketing and advertising strategies and to assess return on investment and conversion rates. Dr. Funk earned his PhD and master's degree in sport management from The Ohio State University, where I previously was teaching, and his bachelor's degree in communication from the University of Kansas. Dr. Funk has worked on the faculty at the University of Texas at Austin and the University of Louisville. He currently has adjunct professional appointments with the Griffin Business School, Gold Coast, Australia, the Gordon Institute of Business Science, Pretoria, South Africa, and Educational Studies, University of Putra, Malaysia. I am delighted to present Dr. Daniel Funk, the 2014 Lewis Scholar Lecturer.
How are you? Is that better? Now you can't see me. I don't know how else to do this. So, can you hear me okay? I don't have a clicker, so I'm going to run back and forth. So, thank you. It's nice to see a lot of people I recognize. Definitely thank you for coming on Wednesday afternoon. I do this a little bit at my campus. I know how hard it is for people to come out, so thank you. I was given the task of coming up with a presentation that was pretty broad. So if you want a bunch of statistics, you're not going to get it. And in fact, if you want something on the PCM, you're not going to get it. So I'm trying to be a little different in this approach. So I'm going to cross 4 different areas. One would be sport, one event, one tourism, and one is called experience design. So we're looking at kind of 4 different areas. I'm going to roll them all in a ball and try to present something to you. Before I begin, I just want to give you a background. They say that you can't outrun your past, that life catches up to you. I started out when I got my master's degree and went into the industry, and I did a lot of event work. And after working 50, 60 hours a week, sometimes 70, I thought there had to be something better. So I went back and got my PhD. And after that, I said, I don't want to do anything with events. I want to focus on expanding, So I became an expert at fan behavior. And I fast forward, now I'm into fun behavior. So I don't do much fan research much anymore. I now have kind of gravitated to sport events. So again, my past has caught up to me. So they say never forget your roots. And so today I'm going to give you some experience that I've had with sport events, give you some real world examples as well. And so maybe give you a little idea to leave understanding this notion of experience design. So if you leave today and can't answer these two questions, get your money back from James. Okay, so I think it's important that you understand that we're going to answer these two questions today. First is, how do we evaluate the benefits? Which for many of you might be some, you already know this, but we'll go through that kind of quickly. And then the second question is, how do we select the type of event? So if I'm Athens, or Atlanta, Philadelphia, Denver, how do I, as an entity, a city, select the type of sport events to offer? So becoming more realistically is this notion that budgets are tight. This word, what's this word called? Sustainability. You keep hearing it over and over. You cannot get into any kind of enterprise that's not going to be sustainable. And so sport events, by their nature, must also become sustainable. So the notion first is I'm going to talk about this big conceptual model. If you flow along on the first is a box called community resources. And I'm going to talk about each one of these boxes over the next couple slides. The first one are the community resources that go to have the event. The second box, well, that is how much money you have determines what kind of event you host and the management that goes into hosting that event. The third stage deals with this notion of stakeholders, key stakeholders that will benefit from this event. And then number 4 is this notion of return on investment. If you host it, will they come? If you host it, does it make money? If you host it, will it lose money? These kind of things. And then that should, if you make money, should go back into repopulating and sustaining the community. Okay, so when I go throughout the slides, keep this in mind. Community resources, go to the event type of management, key stakeholders, return on investment, that feeds in to community resources. I don't know about Athens, but Philadelphia is broken. You know, our education system is underfunded, our roads are horrible to tread, our medical system needs help, but yet people want to spend money on sports. They want to spend money on events. We have a problem, we have a crisis. You know? So if I'm the city, why would I take money from schools and education, roads, and hospitals to have a golf tournament or to have a marathon event? I'm taking money out of my bucket, my resource bucket, to then apply to a sport event. So you can see it's very contentious. There's a finite amount of resources. So the art is becoming more important with the sport, event, and tourism disciplines and the management of it, is how do we show that we're important enough to take money from very important services, transportation, education, hospitals. So it brings me to this notion of where does a city budget come from? All of you know about taxes, I'm assuming. So we pay taxes. That taxes go, if I use my, I'm a loyal Dr. Pepper drinker, but this is the closest thing we had on campus, Mr. Pibb. So don't tell anybody I'm drinking this. But this was my city budget. I take taxes, put in there. License and fees, I put in there. Business taxes. I take tourist dollars. And then I have to pull it out to make decisions. So across the bottom are all the ways a city of Athens, Denver, San Francisco, any city generates their income. So every benefit that you have, everything that you have as a person that lives in a community comes from this city budget. So the question becomes, if I'm taking all this amount of dollars that are generated through some kind of public taxation system, How do I spend the money wisely? So remember, putting resources lead to this notion of event types. Obviously, the more money I have, maybe the larger the event is. In the tourism event area, they normally divide events up into 4 categories. If you can see these on the top and the bottom, mega events, hallmark events, major events, and what we call local community events. I've listed some descriptions with each bullet point. The first one I think needs no introduction. Olympics, FIFA. These are huge mega events that drive a lot of political, social, economic benefits, impact. And then things like the Boston Marathon, which is held obviously in Boston every year. The Masters, which is held where? Augusta. So these are tied to locations. They're not quite as big, but they're linked to a location. All right? The third category are the rotating events. Super Bowl, NCAA basketball. They rotate around. Okay? And the bottom one is everything else. I've listed one that I know about here. It's called Thunder Tell-Off. That's held here in Athens. So it's a small little event, but still, it's just part of the overall portfolio of events. So those are the 4 types of events. The management that goes into this is very different. Very different. So if you think about the money leads to the type of events that we have, or able to have. Then you have this notion of like, well, who will manage the event? This is where a lot of the education is going on. Whether it be a sport manager, an event manager, a tourism manager. Okay, this is maybe you'll get a job in hosting one of these events. So the event types really determined by the budget, politics, community needs and assessments. So that leads to the 4th box, which is what we call stakeholders. These are people who have some kind of interest, some kind of benefit from this event. You take the Peachtree Road Race. Again, I'm just using road race and kind of create a theme. This could be any event, whether it's a volleyball tournament, whether it's an NCAA basketball tournament. Who stands to benefit or lose from this event? As you notice, there is what we call the usual suspects. So when you have a meeting that brings all these stakeholders together, it is like a Wild West show. Everybody has their own interests. Everybody has needs. They're looking at their own business models. They're looking at what it is that they're going to gain. So as you can see, going down, you have a lot of things that have nothing to do with sport. Because, as we'll talk about later, this is something bigger than sport, bigger than things. It's a bigger entity. So it's going to include a lot of different people. All right, so the key is that our key stakeholders, starting from the government all the way down to residents and tourists, all have to be aligned. So if you're running this event, I've sat into a committee where all these people are in a big table, and I wish I was able to film it just to see all the different attitudes and opinions in this position involved. So the smaller the event, the less stakeholders you would have. Right? So again, I put up this chart to actually include from small event to the mega event. So when you spend money, you want to know how you get a benefit in return. And this becomes like the big issue. So return on investment. I'm going to spend a little more time on this. So think about return on investment. If I take money out of my city budget to run a marathon event, I need to put money back. Otherwise, hospitals and roads and schools are closing, right? It's like that. But the reality is, it's only a finite amount. This is a finite amount. So if I take money out, I've got to put money back in. So in the literature, probably from the tourism literature, they focus on this really clever dimensions of triple bottom line. So triple bottom line. So we think about the economics, the social, and the environmental. So if you host an event, those are 3 key impacts that you have. So let's talk about the three dimensions. Triple bottom line. I put up this chart. As you can see, they start making sense. On the left, economic benefits. All right? So we have this event. Is there business growth? Is there money changing hands? Are there jobs being created? But more importantly, are those benefits actually touching and being spread across the multiple people? And the last, under economics, is this notion of brand destination image. Like you think about London or New York. You know what's funny is, recently they have suggested that maybe the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup, not that important. New York, London say we don't need any kind of event anymore. People know New York and London. So again, if you need a brand image, you potentially look at Spurgeon. Social. Social begins to get a little more soft. Like the bottom, improved quality of life. That's big. Things like individual involvement, how to get residents involved. So what we see, going from left to right, economics has been more objectively measured and assessed. Social, a little bit harder, then to the natural environmental resources, a little bit harder. Politicians, people who work in hotels, people who run sport organizations, they love to talk about social benefits. I have the World Cup. People play soccer, they're healthier. Maybe. I run a marathon event. Oh, all the couch potatoes are getting up and running. Yeah, maybe not. 42K or 26 miles a long way. So if you think about it, the social benefit is used a lot. And I find my colleagues in sport and tourism, they use it all the time. And I say, well, how do you really know? How do you measure this? The environmental part is huge, especially depending if it's a reoccurring event, like Augusta, the Masters, Boston Marathon. If you build a large infrastructure, what's the legacy? These kind of issues. Does it affect the environment? If you're running a rock climbing event, it's like anything else. When you rock climb, you don't want to leave a footprint. So does your event leave a footprint on the natural resources in the environment? So I'm going to talk about economic and social, just because I don't want to have you here until 6. And so I'll briefly talk about economic. I'll go over social. So I want to give you an example of how this works. The most used way to assess triple bottom line from an economic perspective is what we call return on investment driven by spending. So you'll see there are 3 categories: direct, indirect, and induced. Direct, indirect, and induced. So let's say I go to the Boston Marathon. All right? I fly into Boston. What am I going to spend money on? Well, I need a hotel. I'm going to go to restaurants. So my money from Philadelphia, where I live, is now being transported courtesy of U.S. Airways or whatever North Carolina I am. Then I start spending money in Boston. That's direct spending. All right? Simple. So any kind of money that comes from a tourist, and a tourist is defined as somebody who lives about 40, 50 miles away and stays overnight. So it can't be someone from Atlanta coming up here, per se, or someone from Athens going up to Atlanta. Let's just put it out. All right. Indirect spending. So what happens is, the next 2 categories, if I take a rock, I have this rock, and I throw it into the pond. When that rock hits the water, what happens? It creates ripples. So what happens is that dollar goes in, and ripples are created. Those are additional rounds of spending. All right, so okay, let's say I go to a restaurant, and I buy some food. All right? Well, the restaurant had a special on cod, and I had a salad. Well, as soon as I consume that, the restaurant has to go buy some more cod and more lettuce. So they've got to restock their shelves. Right? And then, because I'm a big tipper, I tip 30%. And my staff person then has that extra dollars, they go out and they spend it on a bar, or they go buy linens at Target. So it becomes this notion that you put the dollar in and it creates multiple rounds of spending. And that itself is where there's a lot of disagreement. Atlanta, huge economic market. Athens, smaller. So $1 in Atlanta is not the same as $1 in Athens. Hugely different. So the bigger the area, the less impact. So, the bottom one is, I guess, when I work with the clients who want us to do this kind of research, I say focused on the last one. That is money in my pocket. If I'm working in a city that has an event, I want to help the people who live there. So that last one is a very important one. How much money am I taking home as a resident? So here's an example. We did some work for a client, a large marathon event that didn't even sell out. The event is run by a private organization. That means the city outsources it. About 95% of all large money events are run by a non-city entity. So if you know a private sector issue, private sectors are now running, I include on top of that as well, they're really running this notion of the days. So in a one-day event, there was a half marathon, a marathon, and a 5K. In one day, they generated $65 million of economic activity. That's all those three direct and indirect induced funded together. They love big numbers. But to separate them, they get a little different. The second thing that we know from this one-day event is that the household income of the people who live in that city, on a collective average, $27 million. Huge. And obviously, if there's too many people living there, not that great. But that's huge. $27 million. One-day event. And then the last one is one that a lot of our clients, we find this stuff actually occurring in the news and weeks after we go into reports. We created $65 million, $755 million. Anybody, this is a one-day event. Does anybody think that that last number, what happened that be? $755 million. I've run a few marathons, but that's a lot of jobs, isn't it? Who works at a marathon? Maybe there's a few people, a lot of volunteers, they maybe ramp up the staff. So this number is what's called a full-time equivalent. No marathon has 755 full-time people. But because of the money that's put into the economy, it's the equivalent of creating the jobs. So if the economy is doing this, and the event comes in, you have a spike. So there's more income. All right, that's pretty good. But yet, we can go even further. We're talking return on investment. On the left side, I can break it out using some modeling that we have into the sectors that will benefit the most. We know that, for instance, food and beverage, we'll see a $3.5 million bump. It kind of makes sense that hotels will benefit, especially when people come in and stay in hotels. Local transportation, retail stores. You can see that the notion is that there's a lot. There's more categories, but these are kind of the normal things. Well, obviously, since hotels benefit the most, there are probably employees that benefit. So on the right-hand side, we have the employment figures. So I can break up and tell how many jobs are created in a certain type of employment. Now we're talking like, okay. So if I'm in that meeting now and I want to take money out of my city budget, I can say, hey, look, I'm creating jobs. I'm taking that dollar and generating income back in to the city. That's pretty good, isn't it? How do you think we collect this data? Do you think I actually take my dollar bill out and mark it? Funk. And then I just track it. I've got a chip in it. I put a chip in that dollar. I follow it around. How do you think I would collect this kind of data? Any think of ideas? Surveys. Who would you survey?
People were there.
What's that? The tourists. The people who are your tourists. So then you ask them for spending counts. Oh, as you can see, these numbers should start getting a little more fuzzy because I go home a week later, oh, how much you spend on the hotel? Oh, my credit card. How much do I spend on? Oh, yeah, I spent $32 on cabs. It's a little bit high. It's very difficult to get these numbers unless you go to the actual users. And this is where economic return on investment, economic impact, always has a bit of a cloud around it. And the reason why I bring this up is these numbers sound impressive, but they are an estimate. I can actually increase this using assumptions. I can have a very conservative estimate or a very optimistic estimate. So in your mind, when you read something from now on, it is an estimate, or some people say guesstimate. Right? So that's economic impact. And we know that it becomes a little bit opaque in the sense that some of the numbers are difficult to verify. But now we have this really broad category called social. Anything that alters the way you live right now. So there's a lot of construction going on around this campus. That's altering patterns. If there's a car accident on the highway coming in, you're stuck in traffic, that alters the weather. If you think about a sport event can actually drop into your community and put on. I lived in Australia for 8 years. I lived in a place called the Gold Coast. Every year they had a huge motorsport rally. They would start building in October for an event that was mid-November. Starting in October, they closed down the highway, and it was a nightmare. For 6 weeks of my life, I hated sporting events. I hated motorsport. In fact, I get a rash when I think about it. So it really affected my life. So the same thing. So the way you work, the way you live, the way we interact with one another, that's a big, see, this is big. This is big, high level thinking. So some researchers trying to put a little boundary around social impact said, well, let's face it, there's only really 2 ways that you look at social impact related to sport events. The first is how the sport event actually helps sport in the community. So if you have a large Olympics where people World Cup, you have a lot more stadiums. You have grassroots, more people playing these sports. So you can actually help this. The other way is we're going to use the sport event as a tool to do something for the community. So one says I'm going to increase sport event. Other is I'm going to use it as a tool to do something else. Okay? So community development. So sport managers, event managers, are really looking at the box on the left. They want more sport. They want this. The one on the right are the best of all the other 2 states. Okay? So I made up a nice little chart of various findings, various social impacts that have been reported. The nice thing about social is include anything that economic impact. Well, because the way I work depends on how much money I have. The way I live. So a good economic impact, we don't have to have that. Employment, certainly that may affect the people who work in sport or event related. City pride. Ooh, this is good. I feel better about living in Atlanta because Atlanta has this great sport. That's the theory. Why do people want the Olympics?